The stagecoach lurched through the final stretch of frozen prairie, its wheels groaning beneath the weight of distance and destiny. Snow clung stubbornly to the edges of the windows, blurring the world into streaks of white and silver. Inside, Mary sat with her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, every breath shallow beneath her wool cloak. She had traveled nearly 1,000 miles from Georgia to Wyoming, alone, frightened, and carrying nothing but a threadbare carpet bag, and the last prayer she had whispered before stepping onto that coach. "Lord, please let this be the place where I stop running." She was 22, black, plus size, and marked by a lifetime of being too visible and invisible at the same time. The orphanage had taught her silence, the farms had taught her labor, and the world had taught her to expect very little. But this journey, this letter, this promise had forced her into a risk so outrageous she almost laughed when she thought about it. A mail-order marriage, a man she had never met, a home she had never seen. And now the stagecoach slowed. The driver called out through the swirling snow, "Twin Pines Ranch!" Mary's heart stumbled in her chest. She gathered her carpetbag and stepped down into the icy wind. The cold cut straight through her clothing, stealing her breath. The ranch lay ahead, a wide stretch of hardy land with a sturdy cabin at its heart, smoke rising confidently from its chimney. A good sign, a living sign. But the door swung open before she reached it. 2 men stepped out onto the porch. Not one, 2. Twin brothers, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, tall enough to make the horizon nervous. Their coats hung open despite the cold, revealing strong torsos and the kind of muscle a lifetime of manual work could carve. Their eyes, dark gray, storm-colored, locked on her with something between surprise and careful hope. Mary stopped mid-step, her boots sinking slightly into the snow. The one standing slightly ahead spoke first. "I'm Lester Mallister," he said, voice deep enough to warm the cold between them. "And this here is my brother, Luther." Mary blinked rapidly. In the letters there had only been one name, one man, one future. Her gloved fingers tightened around the carpetbag handle. Had she been tricked? Sold? Was this a trap? But then Luther stepped forward, palms raised slightly in a quiet gesture of peace. "Ma'am, we don't aim to frighten you. We should have explained better. The ranch, it's a 2-man job, always has been, and we share the work, all of it." Mary swallowed hard. Their voices were warm, but her life had taught her caution. Her voice barely made it past her throat. You didn't say anything in your letters." Lester winced, the expression softening his stern features. "That's on me. I didn't know how to say it without making it sound improper. But we wanted you here, both of us. A home can be built a lot of ways." Luther took a slow step backward, giving her space rather than crowding her. "You're free to turn around and go if you choose, but you've traveled far, and the storm's getting worse. Please, come inside out of the cold. Rest first. Decisions can wait." Their restraint was the first kindness she had received in months. Mary forced herself forward, each step measured, careful. When she reached the porch, Lester opened the door wider, letting warm golden light spill over her boots. The cabin glowed with firelight and smelled of herbs and simmering stew. She stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind her with a finality that made her chest tighten. The cabin was beautiful, simple but clean. Hand-carved furniture, polished wood floors, a patchwork rug near the hearth. A life built by hands that cared about what they touched. "Sit here," Lester said gently, pulling out a chair. Mary hesitated only a moment before sinking into it. Luther moved toward the stove with easy confidence and ladled warm stew into a bowl, setting it in front of her with a thick slice of bread. "Eat, please," he said. "We can talk after." She picked up the spoon with trembling fingers. The first bite hit her like a blessing, savory, rich, warm, like being seen for the first time. Her eyes stung. She didn't dare let tears fall. As she ate, the brothers exchanged a glance, a wordless conversation born from being two halves of one life. Lester finally spoke. "We know this is unexpected, and we know the world don't look kindly on arrangements like this. But out here," he gestured toward the window where snow beat against the glass, "out here folks survive by trust, by partnership, by choosing who stands at your back." Luther's voice softened. "We're asking if you'll give this a chance. Not today, not rushed. Just give us time. Let us show you who we are." Mary felt something loosen inside her chest, something small, afraid, and aching. These men were strangers. They could be dangerous. They could be kind. They could be both. But she had crossed a continent for a chance at belonging, and now two sets of storm-gray eyes waited for her answer like men who had something to lose. She set her spoon down slowly. I need time," she whispered. Lester nodded firmly, like a vow. "And time you'll have." And Mary realized, with a trembling exhale, that this was the first decision in her life she'd been allowed to make freely.
Morning arrived slowly at Twin Pines Ranch, prying open the world with pale gold light that slipped through the seams of the curtains. Mary woke to the soft crackle of firewood in the hearth and the distant thud of boots on the porch. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the stagecoach ride, the two men waiting on the porch, the way the storm had swallowed the night whole. Then the reality of yesterday settled around her like a heavy quilt. Two brothers, two futures she had never imagined, and a choice that felt too large for her hands. Mary dressed quietly, smoothing her simple gray dress over her curves. The mirror above the washstand reflected a face both familiar and foreign, soft brown skin warmed by sleep, dark eyes ringed with uncertainty, and something else, something beginning to look like hope. When she stepped into the main room, Luther was standing at the stove humming a tune under his breath. Lester sat at the table mending a bridle, the leather taut between his calloused hands. Both men looked up. Mary felt heat rise beneath her cheeks. She wasn't used to being noticed. Usually she moved like a whisper through spaces where her absence was easier for people than her presence. "Good morning, ma'am," Luther said, with a smile that reached the edges of his storm-gray eyes. "Biscuits are almost done." Lester nodded toward the chair he had pulled out for her. "Coffee's hot. Take your time waking up. Storm passed in the night, but the cold's still mean." She sat cautiously, like the chair might break under her, or worse, like she might break if she let herself relax. Then Luther set down a plate before her, golden biscuits dripping with butter, scrambled eggs, and bacon crisped at the edges. Her throat tightened. This was more food than she'd seen set aside for one person in months. "I don't have to fuss over me," she whispered. Lester shook his head. "And ain't fussin'. You're here, you eat. That's how a home works." Mary took a small bite of biscuit and nearly sighed. The buttery warmth spread across her tongue, richer than anything the orphanage had ever given her. Eating like this felt almost sinful. She chewed slowly, afraid that if she devoured it too quickly it would disappear like a dream. The brothers talked softly between themselves as she ate, about cattle in the south pasture, about fence posts that needed mending, about the storm having pushed drifts against the barn door. Their voices carried the easy rhythm of people who'd shared their whole lives, but neither forgot she sat there. They spoke gently around her, offering her a place without demanding she take it. "Mary," Lester said, finally leaning back slightly, "we thought you might want to see the ranch today. No work expected. Just look, walk a bit, breathe." "I can work," she said automatically, the words an old survival reflex. "I'm strong. I can earn my keep." Luther set down the skillet and approached the table, wiping his hands on a cloth. "We know that, but you ain't got to prove anything. Rest comes first. Rest. The word sat strangely in her chest. After breakfast, bundled in coats and boots too large but warm, Mary followed them outside. The cold hit her like a slap, sharp and invigorating. The ranch spread before her, a patchwork of corrals, a barn with weathered siding, the mountains rising in the distance like guardians carved from stone. Mary walked on her left, his quiet presence a steadying force. Lester walked on her right, pointing out landmarks, the spring that never froze, the field destined for next season's corn, the chicken coop currently occupied by 2 feuding hens. Mary took it all in slowly. The land felt vast, almost impossibly so. Back home the world was cramped, rules pressed tight around her. But here, the air felt wide. Lester stopped near a split-rail fence and rested his hand on the top beam. This place, it's not much by city standards, but we built every inch of it together. Luther nodded. And we want someone who'll build the rest with us, not as a servant, not as property, as family. Her breath caught. She didn't know how to hold that word. Family. She'd never truly had one. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. Why me? Out of all the women you could have chosen, why send for me? The brothers exchanged a glance, silent communication passing between them like wind over tall grass. Lester spoke first. Because your letters weren't like the rest. Most folks wrote like they was selling themselves. You wrote like someone who had survived things and still hoped for better. Luther's voice softened. We saw strength in you, and kindness, and loneliness that looked like our own. Tears pricked her eyes unexpectedly and hot. She looked away quickly. Mary, Lester said gently, you don't owe us anything. You can stay as long as you need. And if you choose a life with us, it'll be because you chose it, not because the world pushed you here. Her breath shuddered out. The wind tugged at her bonnet, the cold biting her cheeks, but for the first time in days, she felt warm. She turned back to them, 2 men, almost identical, yet somehow entirely different, waiting with patient, open faces. I need time, she whispered. Luther nodded once. We've got all the time you need. And as they walked back toward the cabin, Mary felt something shift inside her, something small but real, like the first spark beneath cold ashes. Something beginning.
The days that followed unfolded with a kind of gentle rhythm Mary had never known, a soft unwinding of knots she hadn't realized she carried. Each morning she woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke, and each morning she found one or both of the brothers already awake, already working, already moving with the quiet purpose of men who knew their place in the world. Mary did not know her place yet, but the land seemed determined to show her. On the first clear morning after the storm, the sun poured gold over the ranch, melting the last stubborn crusts of snow. Luther handed her a pair of gloves, big enough to swallow her fingers whole, and led her outside. Lester followed, with a bucket of fresh water sloshing against its sides. "We'll start light," Luther said, adjusting his hat against the sun. "No heavy lifting, just getting familiar." Mary nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. She had performed every kind of hard labor back east, but here everything felt different, bigger, wider, heavier. She wasn't sure if she could match the pace of men who moved as if born from the earth itself. They took her to the chicken coop first. The hens clucked indignantly as Luther reached into nesting boxes and pulled out warm brown eggs. "You'll collect these in the mornings if you choose to stay. They're temperamental, but harmless." One hen pecked his wrist. He winced. "Mostly harmless." Mary couldn't help it. She laughed. The sound startled her. It had been so long since a laugh felt natural instead of guarded. Lester turned toward her at the sound, his lips lifting just enough to betray a smile. "Good to hear you laugh," he murmured. She ducked her head, embarrassed by how warm that simple comment made her. Next, they showed her the garden, empty now except for winter-stubborn herbs and drying stalks left for seed. "We'll plant in spring," Lester said. "If you've got knowledge about crops, we'd value your hand in plannin'." Mary hesitated, surprised. "You'd take my input?" Luther leaned against a fence post. "Why wouldn't we?" Back in Georgia, her opinions had been dismissed with quick, irritated flicks of hands. Women didn't plan crops, they weeded them. They didn't decide, they complied. The idea that her voice mattered here felt both thrilling and frightening. Finally, they walked toward the far pasture where the brothers kept their cattle. The herd grazed lazily, long tails flicking at flies. Mountains rose beyond them, sharp, snow-capped, ancient. Mary stopped without meaning to, breath catching in her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lester stepped beside her, close but respectful. "We think so too." Mary glanced at the men walking one step ahead of her, their shoulders brushing occasionally, their strides near identical. The twins moved as though sharing one unbroken rhythm, the air between them almost alive with connection. It made her heart ache with a strange longing. She didn't want to interrupt that rhythm. She didn't want to break anything. As if sensing her thoughts, Luther looked back at her with a reassuring smile. "There's room for 3 people in a rhythm, Mary. Life's just got to teach us the steps." Her cheeks warmed. She looked away quickly. After lunch, Mary helped with lunch, shaping dough under Luther's patient guidance. Her hands moved stiffly at first, but he corrected her with gentle taps, not grabbing, not forcing, just showing. When she pressed too hard into the dough, Luther chuckled. "Not so rough. You're making biscuits, not breaking enemies." Lester, seated at the table sanding a piece of pine, added softly, "She's strong. Strength ain't a flaw." Her breath hitched. Compliments were foreign currency to her, rare, unexpected, and hard to accept. She kept her eyes on the dough as she whispered, "I don't know how to do this." Luther leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do what?" "Be wanted," she said softly. "Be considered. Be chosen." Silence filled the room, not heavy, but tender. Lester set the wood aside and rose slowly. He stopped in front of Mary, close enough to warm the space around her, but not touching. "Mary, we didn't send for a servant, or a placeholder wife, or someone to fill a cold cabin. We sent for you. What you don't know yet, we'll teach you. What we don't know yet, we'll learn from you." His voice held a gravity that made her chest tremble. Luther nodded. "We ain't in a hurry. You tell us what pace feels right." Her eyes stung. "I don't want to disappoint you." "You couldn't," Lester said simply. After lunch, Lester took her to the workshop behind the cabin. It smelled of sawdust, cedar, and varnish. Shelves lined the walls, filled with tools arranged with careful precision. "I made something for you," he said, almost shy. He lifted a small wooden shelf, smooth, polished, carved with delicate swirls. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. Her hand flew to her mouth. "For me?" He nodded. "Somewhere to put whatever you carry. Books, trinkets, pieces of your life." She ran her fingers over the wood. It was warm beneath her touch, a quiet promise of permanence. "I don't have much," she whispered. Luther appeared in the doorway. "Then we'll give you things worth keeping." It wasn't the words that undid her. It was the sincerity in their voices, the undeniable truth that these men saw her not as a burden, but as a blessing. That evening, as Mary lay in the small guest room, the moonlight painting soft patterns on the quilt, she turned onto her side, staring at the folded blue curtain fabric that lay at the foot of her bed, 12 inches of cloth that symbolized far more than decor. It symbolized choice, belonging, possibility, and somewhere, faint and fragile, a budding desire to stay. Winter deepened around Twin Pines Ranch, settling into the land with a quiet, relentless certainty. Frost clung to the edges of the windows in delicate white veins, and the nights grew longer, colder, more intimate.
The cabin became a haven against the frozen world outside, a place where firelight glowed warm and steady, reflecting off polished wood and the soft expressions of two men learning how to make space for a woman who didn't quite believe she deserved any. Mary settled into this rhythm carefully. She learned the way the boards creaked under Luther's heavier step and the softer thud of Lester's boots. She memorized the smell of freshly cut pine from Lester's workshop and the slow, savory perfume of Luther's stews. She began humming again, quietly at first, then more boldly when Luther joined her in the kitchen with a voice rough but warm. But something else was beginning too. An awareness. A slow-blooming heat she had tried for weeks to ignore. It happened late one evening, after a day spent hauling wood and repairing the coop door. Snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in white silence. Mary stood at the sink washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, steam curling around her cheeks. Her back ached pleasantly, and she hummed a tune she didn't quite remember learning. Then she felt it. A presence behind her. Close, warm, unmistakable. Lester. He didn't touch her. He didn't even speak at first. But the air changed the moment he entered the space behind her, grew denser, warmer, charged with something unsaid. "May I?" he asked softly. His voice passed through her like a ripple across still water. She nodded before she could think. Lester stepped closer, his chest brushing the faintest whisper against her back as he reached into the warm water. His hands, large, steady, surprisingly gentle, covered hers beneath the surface as he helped guide the dishcloth over a porcelain plate. The touch was simple, innocent, yet Mary felt it everywhere. Her breath stuttered. Lester leaned down slightly, his breath warming the side of her neck. "You've been working hard today. Thought you might like a hand." She swallowed around a lump in her throat. I didn't want to get in the way." "You couldn't," he murmured. Her heartbeat fluttered like something trapped and desperate to be free. Then footsteps approached the doorway. Mary turned slightly. Luther stood there, one shoulder leaning against the frame, eyes dark and unreadable in the dim light. Yet there was no anger, no jealousy, only a quiet hunger held carefully in check. Lester didn't move away from her, and Luther didn't step back. The silence stretched too thick to ignore, too intimate to misinterpret. Mary felt heat crawl up her throat, flustered by the weight of their gazes. She pulled her hands from the water and dried them shakily with a cloth. She started, but the words drifted off. "Mary," Luther said, stepping into the room, his voice dropped low, warm as summer. "You look scared." She wasn't afraid of them. She was afraid of herself, of wanting something forbidden, impossible, something the world would never understand. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. Lester gently turned her to face them both. "Do what?" She could barely breathe. "Want two men." Luther's jaw tightened, but not with anger, with restraint, with aching, careful hope. "You don't have to know how," he said. "You just have to tell us what you feel." Mary closed her eyes. Then she said it, the truth she had swallowed for days. "I want you, both of you, and it scares me." The confession shattered something fragile in the room, not peace, doubt. Lester exhaled sharply and stepped closer. "Mary, we're right here. We'd never rush you." "We'd never hurt you," Luther said softly. She met their eyes, storm gray, earnest, intense, and saw no deceit, only desire tempered by patience, only longing bound by respect. She took a breath. Then, "Come here." The words hung between them, trembling. Luther crossed the kitchen in 3 strides. Lester moved just as quickly. They didn't touch her at once. They simply stood on either side of her as if waiting for her to take the final step. Mary lifted her hands, hesitant but steady, and placed one on each man's chest. Their breaths hitched in unison. That was enough. Luther reached up first, brushing a thumb along her jawline, the touch feather-light. Lester's hand settled on her waist, warm through the fabric, grounding her. "Tell us if anything feels wrong," Lester whispered. "Or too fast," Luther added. Mary nodded, but her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Nothing feels wrong." They led her to the small bedroom at the end of the hall. Candlelight flickered against the rough wooden walls, painting shadows that danced with the beating of her heart. Lester lit a single candle. Luther sat on the edge of the bed and gently guided her between his knees, his hands unsteady for the first time she had seen him. He unpinned her hair, letting the dark coils spill free. His breath hitched softly as he whispered, "You're beautiful." Lester's fingers traced the buttons of her dress, each motion a question, a chance for her to say no. She didn't say no. And as they undressed her, piece by careful piece, she did not feel exposed. She felt seen, cherished, chosen. And when they finally lay her down between them, the world outside, cold, judgmental, and distant, ceased to exist. For the first time in her life, Mary did not feel alone. She felt wanted. She felt whole. She felt theirs.
The morning after that fragile, world-shifting night arrived gently, with pale sunlight slipping through the frosted window panes. The cabin was quiet, but not the uneasy quiet of strangers avoiding each other. It was the softness of 3 people waking slowly from something sacred, fragile, and new. Mary stirred beneath the quilt. Warmth pooled around her, her breath still carrying traces of the courage she'd found. She blinked, letting the hazy light sharpen. Lester lay on one side of her, shirtless but covered with a blanket, face turned toward her in sleep. Luther slept behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing warm against her back. But neither man held her possessively, neither clutched, neither confined. Their bodies remained close without boxing her in, as though each understood instinctively that she needed room to wake slowly, on her terms. Mary slipped from the bed quietly, careful not to disturb them. Her legs felt unsteady, not from fear, but from the weight of all the choices she had made in one breathtaking night. She dressed slowly, smoothing her hands over her curves, grounding herself. "This is real. This is happening. You are not the girl the world discarded." Outside, snow still layered the land like a thick white quilt, but the sky was clear, blue as promise. When she stepped into the main room, the dying embers in the hearth glowed low and warm. She crouched to add a log, coaxing the flames with practiced motions. The crackle filled the silence. Behind her, a soft footstep. Mary turned, expecting Luther, always the first to rise. But it was Lester. His hair was muscled, his eyes heavy with sleep, his jaw shadowed. He looked less like the stoic rancher she was getting to know, and more like a man caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. "You okay?" he asked softly, voice still rough from sleep. I nodded, though my stomach fluttered. "I didn't want to wake either of you." He stepped closer, not too close, just enough that she felt the warmth of him. "You didn't. I sleep light, always have." Silence stretched, gentle, tentative. "Mary, I want you to know, nothing that happened last night changes your freedom. You still set the pace. You still choose everything. We don't expect—" "I know," she said softly. And she did. She felt it. She believed it. Lester's shoulders relaxed.
For a moment he simply stood there, looking at her as though she were the sunrise. The bedroom door creaked open, and Luther appeared, hair tousled, shirt in his hand, grin slow and warm. "Well now, seems I'm the last one awake. That's embarrassing." Mary felt her cheeks heat. Luther laughed softly, not at her, but with the same warm ease he always offered. He moved toward the stove. "How about I make breakfast? The three of us could use something hearty." They shared breakfast in quiet conversation. Biscuits, fried potatoes, coffee strong enough to wake the mountains. The brothers were careful, their touches gentle, their glances questioning rather than assuming. Mary found herself smiling more than she expected. But by midday, reality crept in like a draft under the door. They needed to talk. Lester suggested a walk, just the three of them. The air was crisp, each breath visible, the snow crunching under their boots. They walked along the fence line, the mountains looming in their winter majesty. Mary's heart tightened with worry. What if last night had ruined everything? What if they regretted it? What if she did? Luther must have sensed the shift in her shoulders. "Mary, whatever's worrying you, say it, please." She stopped walking. Lester and Luther turned toward her, both faces open, patient, steady. "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. The wind caught her words, but the brothers heard them. Luther stepped forward first. "A burden? Mary, you've brought life into this place, laughter, light, things we didn't realize we were missing." Lester's gaze softened. "Last night wasn't a mistake, not for us. But if you feel unsure, tell us. If you feel overwhelmed, tell us. This only works if we're honest." Mary felt the pressure building behind her eyes. "I'm not unsure," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm terrified, but I want this. I want both of you. I've never wanted something so much." Luther exhaled, relief flooding his face. "Then fear's okay. Fear means the choice matters." Lester reached out and took her gloved hand gently. "We're in this together." They walked again, slowly, the world around them steady and white. When they returned to the cabin, Mary felt lighter, safer, certain. The days that followed became a quiet exploration, not of bodies, that had already been offered with care, but of rhythms, boundaries, and unspoken rules they forged together. They cooked side by side, worked side by side, learned side by side. The land taught her its lessons, the brothers taught her theirs, and Mary learned something more profound than she expected. Love, when chosen freely, was not a chain. It was a shelter, a fire in winter, a place to lay down one's past and begin again. But life had one more twist waiting for her, quiet, small, and growing each day like a seed beneath snow. A secret nestled beneath Mary's heart, one she did not yet realize.
Winter loosened its grip on Twin Pines Ranch 1 stubborn inch at a time. Snow melted into deep puddles around the fence posts. The air softened. Birds returned cautiously, singing tentative notes as though checking that spring truly meant to stay. Mary felt the season shift, not just in the land, but in her body. At first it was small things, fatigue, a peculiar sensitivity to certain smells, the way her stomach fluttered at dawn. She thought she was simply adjusting to ranch life, the newness of shared work and shared tenderness. She kept quiet, watched, waited. But the morning she woke with a rolling wave of nausea so strong she barely made it to the wash basin, she understood. Something was changing, something precious. She sat on the edge of the bed afterward, palms pressed to her thighs, breathing slowly.
A tremble worked its way up her arms, not fear, not exactly, but the overwhelming magnitude of what this could mean. She stood, hands moving instinctively to the small but undeniable swell low in her belly. Mary Mallister, once unwanted, once unchosen, might be carrying a child. A life formed in warmth and trust. A life created by love, unconventional, forbidden in the eyes of many, but real. The thought alone made her breath tremble. She said nothing that morning as she joined Lester and Luther for breakfast. The men talked about the new calves due soon, about repairing the west fence before the rains came. Mary nodded at all the right moments, but she kept one hand on her stomach beneath the table almost the entire time. If it's true, how will they react? Will they worry? Will they fight each other? Will the town... Her thoughts tumbled dangerously, fear threading through her hope. The brothers noticed. They always noticed. It was Luther who finally set down his cup and leaned toward her, eyes soft. "Mary, you're pale. You feelin' all right?" She opened her mouth, but her answer dissolved into another sharp wave of nausea. She stood abruptly, hand pressed to her lips, and rushed for the door. Lester was at her side instantly, guiding her onto the porch as the cold air steadied her. When the worst passed, she sagged against the railing. Both men flanked her silently, worry etched into their features. Luther brushed a gentle hand against her cheek. "Mary, how long has this been happening?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "A few days, maybe more. I didn't want to say anything until I knew." "Knew what?" asked Lester quietly. Mary pressed both hands to her stomach. "Knew if it meant something." Silence. Stillness. Even the wind paused. Luther's eyes widened first. Lester swallowed hard, as though steadying himself for the magnitude of her words. "You think you're—" Luther began. Mary nodded once, slowly. "Pregnant," she whispered. The word floated into the cold morning air like a soft miracle. Neither man moved at first. For a heartbeat too long, Mary feared she had made a mistake, that she had ruined their delicate, growing balance. Then Lester stepped forward and cupped her face with both hands, his voice rough with emotion. "Mary, a child, our child." She nodded again, breath shaking. Luther let out a sound, half laugh, half sob, and swept her into a careful embrace, mindful of her belly. "Are you sure? We should get the doctor just to confirm, but Mary, Lord above!" The tenderness in their reactions undid her completely. She pressed her face into Lester's chest and cried, quiet, trembling tears of relief. But joy, like spring, did not come without storms. The doctor arrived 3 days later, traveling from town with a frown already prepared. His eyes flicked between the three of them too many times to be polite. But when he examined Mary, his expression softened. "You're healthy, strong, and yes, you're with child. I'd place the birth near Christmas." A winter baby, a symbol of survival. The doctor's gaze hardened again as he stepped back. "Now, I don't concern myself with how folks choose to live out here, but that woman," he pointed toward Mary, "deserves respect, care, calm. And if I hear otherwise—" His threat hung in the air. Luther bristled. Lester stiffened. Mary stepped between them. "I'll be fine," she assured them. "We'll be fine." The doctor nodded slowly and left, but not before muttering something about unholy arrangements that scalded the back of her ears. And that was only the beginning. As Mary's belly grew, so did the whispers in town. People stared longer. Some sneered.
Some made the sign of the cross as she passed. Others whispered behind store shells, their judgment sharp as winter wind. Women pulled their children closer. Men looked at her with either pity or derision. The preacher's sermon one Sunday was so pointed she didn't need him to say her name to know she was the subject. By the time they returned home, Mary's arms shook silently. She slipped into the garden and knelt among the thawing soil, tears falling freely. Luther found her first. He knelt beside her, his hand covering hers, his voice soft as warm bread. "Let 'em talk, Mary. They don't know love when they see it." Lester arrived moments later, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "They've never built anything worth defending. We have, and we will." Mary looked between them, two men who met her fear with unwavering strength. She placed both hands on her growing belly and whispered, "This child, this family, will be worth every whisper." And in that garden, between thawing earth and the first buds of spring, she finally believed it.
Winter returned with a vengeance, sweeping across the plains with icy teeth and a howl that rattled the windows. As December deepened, the sky wore a constant bruise-blue glare, and the wind prowled the land like a restless predator. Mary's belly was round and heavy now, her steps slower, her breath shorter, yet she moved with a quiet strength that astonished the brothers. Every evening she sat by the fire, sewing small shirts and blankets, each stitch a promise, each piece of fabric a hope. Lester whittled toys, tiny horses, a wooden rattle, while Luther planned the cradle he intended to carve when the last chores of the season eased. But on Christmas Eve, the storm hit. Snow roared against the cabin so hard it shook dust from the rafters. Wind screamed like lost spirits. The temperature plunged with merciless speed. Mary woke before dawn with a sharp tightening across her belly. At first she thought it was just another ache, one of the many her body had taught her to endure. But when the second wave hit, longer, deeper, sharper, she gripped the bedpost and cried out. Lester and Luther were by her side in seconds. "What is it?" Luther asked, voice low and steady, but eyes wide with fear. Mary sucked in a breath, pain rippling through her. I think it's time." A moment of stunned silence. Then Lester moved, fast and sure. "Get the water boiling," he told Luther. "Towels, sheets, everything clean." Luther sprinted for the stove. Mary tried to breathe, but each inhale was swallowed by another contraction. She clung to the bedpost as her body tightened, sweat beading on her forehead despite the winter cold. Lester supported her with firm, warm hands. "Easy now. We're here. You're not alone." Mary met his eyes, storm gray, focused, steady. His presence anchored her, but fear clawed at her chest. "We need to doctor," she gasped. Luther froze with a stack of towels in his arms. "I can ride." "No," Mary whispered fiercely. "Look outside." The storm howled against the cabin so hard its shutters buckled. Wind screamed like lost spirits. The temperature plunged with merciless speed. Lester put a hand on Luther's shoulder. "She's right. You ride out in that, we'd lose you." Luther swallowed hard. He wasn't the type to show fear, but now it flickered in his eyes. "Then we do this ourselves," he whispered. Mary sank to her knees as another contraction tore through her. Luther rushed to her side, towels still in his hands. "Mary, breathe," he said urgently. "Just breathe, sweetheart." Her breath shook as she leaned into him, her fingers digging into his arm. "I'm trying," she gritted. "Lord, I'm trying." Lester lit every lantern in the cabin, filling the room with warm, golden light. The fire roared as if trying to hold back the storm. Water boiled. Sheets were laid across the bed. Towels were stacked. Herbs steeped in a pot. And Mary labored. Hours passed, slow, agonizing, relentless. She walked the floor between contractions, leaning on whichever brother reached her first. She held their hands as her body strained and opened. She cried, moaned, gasped, cursed under her breath, then apologized, only to be shushed gently.
"You have nothing to apologize for," Lester murmured into her hair as he held her upright through another wave. "You're doing beautifully," Luther whispered, rubbing her back. The brothers worked as one mind, Luther cooling her forehead with cloths, Lester massaging her lower back. They moved with frantic precision, yet never once left her side. But the storm did not relent, and neither did the pain. By evening, Mary was exhausted, drenched with sweat, trembling, breath ragged. The contractions came harder now, closer together, taking all the air from her lungs. Luther kneeled beside her as she clutched the edge of the bed, her face taut with agony. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Luther whispered fiercely. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Lester checked between her legs and inhaled sharply. "Mary, I see the head." Her eyes flew open, fear and relief colliding. "Already?" "You're almost there. One more push, maybe two." Mary cried out, raw, primal, desperate, as her body tore open with the overwhelming force of the next contraction. She pushed with everything she left, gripping Luther's arm so hard he winced but held firm. "One more, sweetheart, one more." Mary screamed, ragged, fierce, and then a new sound filled the cabin. A cry, high and thin and perfect. Lester's hands trembled as he lifted the tiny, slippery, dark-haired baby into the lantern light. "A boy," he said, voice breaking. "Mary, it's a boy." Luther let out a choked laugh and pressed his forehead to Mary's, tears streaking his cheeks. "You did it. God above, you did it." Lester laid the newborn on Mary's chest, the baby's warmth soaked into her exhausted body, his tiny fists curling against her skin. Mary stared at him through blurred tears. Her son. Theirs. The storm raged outside, trying to swallow the world whole, but inside the cabin, 3 hearts and 1 brand-new heartbeat formed something stronger than any blizzard could ever touch. A family. And as Mary kissed her son's downy head, she whispered through tears, "Welcome home, Jeremiah."
Morning broke slowly after the blizzard, sunlight creeping across the frozen world like a shy visitor afraid to intrude. The storm had emptied the sky, leaving only a startling blue above fields buried in thick white drifts. Twin Pines Ranch looked small against the vast, untouched snow, small but alive. Inside the cabin, life burned brighter than any storm could dim. Mary woke to the softest sound she had ever heard, tiny breathing, steady and warm, curled against her chest. Jeremiah slept in the crook of her arm, his small hands opening and closing as though reaching for dreams too delicate to name. His weight anchored her, his warmth steadied her, his existence remade her. The brothers slept too, one on each side of the bed, exhausted beyond words. Luther lay on his back, mouth slightly open, hair mussed. Lester slept sitting upright in a chair he dragged close to Mary's bedside, his head tilted forward, arms loosely crossed, as though even sleep couldn't fully convince him she and the baby were safe. Mary looked at both of them, these 2 men who had knelt in the blood and sweat of childbirth, who had held her when the pain seemed impossible, who had cried openly when Jeremiah's first cry split through the storm. Her throat tightened. She had never been claimed with such fierce gentleness, never been protected so completely, never been loved so deliberately. Jeremiah stirred, making a small sound somewhere between a sigh and a mew. Mary shifted him slightly, careful to keep him close. His face, round, soft, and dusky, looked so impossibly perfect she felt tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. Lester woke first, blinking as though surfacing from deep water. When he saw Mary awake, his expression softened into something almost reverent. "Good morning," he rasped, rubbing a hand over his beard. Mary smiled faintly. "Morning." His gaze drifted to the baby, then froze, awe softening his features. He looks bigger already. He leaned forward, brushing a gentle hand over Jeremiah's tiny back. How you feeling? Mary thought for a moment, surprised by her own answer. Strong. As if summoned by the word, Luther groaned awake beside her. Did she say strong? Because I feel like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle. Mary laughed, the sound soft and exhausted, but genuine. Luther's grin widened. They spent the morning in a cocoon of warmth, Lester fetching water, Luther heating broth, Mary nursing Jeremiah with quiet determination. Meals were eaten slowly, between long silences filled only by the crackle of the fire and the murmurs a newborn draws out of even the toughest men. Hours passed before the outside world intruded. When the storm finally eased enough to permit travel, a neighbor rode up to check on them. The brothers stepped outside to speak with him, leaving the cabin door slightly ajar. I heard whispers from the porch. Is it true? A baby? In that storm? Healthy, Lester said proudly. And Mary? A fighter, Luther replied. She came through strong. The neighbor hesitated. I could hear it. Folks'll talk even louder now. Lester's voice cooled like ice forming on still water. Let them. My heart swelled. My men might bend to many things, but not to shame. When the brothers returned, snow melting on their coats, Mary met them with a steady, knowing look. No words were needed. They unburdened their snow-caked jackets, made tea, and settled close around her again. The days that followed shaped themselves into a new rhythm, fragile at first, then steady, then joyous. Mary learned to swaddle Jeremiah with confident hands. Luther rocked him in front of the fire, humming lullabies that didn't have words, but carried the gentle cadence of comfort. Lester carved a cradle, polished, sturdy, and smooth as river stone, setting it beside the bed with a shy pride that warmed Mary's chest. Outside, the world continued its slow thaw. Inside, their small family blossomed. When Mary was strong enough to walk, she took Jeremiah outside wrapped in quilts. The snow glittered beneath the sun, and the crisp air filled her lungs with something sharp and sweet. Luther thrust wood onto the pile with one arm, while keeping close enough to catch her if she needed him. Lester shoveled a path with quick, efficient strokes, but paused often, glancing back to ensure she was steady. Mary stopped near the fence line, looking out over the land her sons would grow upon, the land she herself had learned to love. "This is home," she whispered. Luther slipped an arm around her shoulder. It always was. Lester joined him, placing a hand on Jeremiah's back. And it always will be. Mary rested her head on Luther's shoulder as cold wind brushed her cheeks. Jeremiah stirred, then nestled deeper against her chest. In that moment, she felt something take root, something sturdier than fear, warmer than hope, a future. That night, as snow drifted gently outside and the fire cast dancing patterns on the walls, Mary watched her husbands bathe their son in warm water heated from the stove. Luther held Jeremiah carefully, fear and wonder battling across his face. Lester poured water from a ladle with steady precision. Mary leaned against the bedpost and felt her heart fill. Not with the frantic, desperate longing she'd known most of her life, but with peace, with belonging, with love. As they swaddled Jeremiah and placed him in her arms, Luther brushed her cheek with a thumb. "He's got your strength." "And your stubbornness," added Lester. Mary laughed softly, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. "He has all of us, and that's enough to make him unstoppable." And in the warm glow of the cabin, sealed against the cold, wrapped in the soft breath of their newborn. The three of them understood that the storm had not brought fear. It had brought family. It had brought a beginning.